sent me a smoochy picture.
Why are you laughing at me?
Because he's so funny looking.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Bonjour, Privet, Guten Tag, Ola, and ciao to my foreign friends. This is part 2. We're going to be talking about unusual knives. And, you know, everybody has knives like these in their collection, and I love them, and I have a lot of them. But I really enjoy having the knife that's kind of out there, a little different. Having examples of those. So this is part 2 of my unusual knife video. So if you haven't seen part 1, go ahead and look that up, and we'll get right to it. So this is a Miller Brothers pruner, and what's unusual about this knife is he put the scales on with screws. And you know, of course, that's how we do it with knives nowadays, but back in the 1800s, that was kind of unheard of, and it was an innovation for sure. And what's really strange about this is it is a better way to put a knife together, but you know, nobody really followed suit, and Miller was really the only one who did screws like this on a knife. So pretty interesting. This is a George P. Schrade knife. So George Schrade founded Schrade Cutlery Company, and then he sold his interest to his brother, went off, did his own thing, came back and started another company called George P. Schrade Company. And so this knife is a little unusual because it is a vintage knife dating back to the 50s, 40s, 50s. It's all stainless steel. George Schrade was one of the biggest proponents of stainless steel. And a couple unusual things about this knife. And so the clip is integral to the knife. You can see it's tucked down inside there, so it's easy to clip this knife on. It's a fishing knife, so you have scaler here. When you open this knife up, it locks. And so this is a slip joint, okay? It just pops down. It's a slip joint, but it has this lock right here, which is patented. And when you put that on, you know, the knife won't shut. It has a separate locking mechanism for the knife. That's unusual. And then the design of this knife is a unibody construction. So you can see that here. It's just a piece of steel wrapped over, bent. And this is the type of construction that was pioneered back in the 1880s. So it's not new. It just, you know, you didn't see a lot of this in the first half of the 20th century. Mainly in the second half is when unibody knives pop up. They're just folded over like this, inexpensive knives. So kind of an unusual knife. This knife right here is unusual, not just because of the horse head tail of this knife, but if you open this knife up, it's a lock-in slip joint. So it is a slip joint, but it is lock-in. And if you look, there's no lock on the back, lock release. So how do you release this knife? And what you do is you push in this blade right here, and as you push that blade in, you'll see how the top opens up. You push that blade in and the top opens, and then you just shut it like that. That's really unusual. And so there's a company now today, I think, I can't remember who's doing it, but there's a company today that uses that, and you see it here and there in knife designs in the early part of the 20th century, but not very prominent. It was very unusual, and it still is unusual to, you know, shut your knife by pushing down on this blade right here. Kind of cool. All right, next. Let's see. This is a holly knife, and so this knife is unusual in a couple ways. So this was an attempt to make an inexpensive fruit knife, And this knife is covered in nickel, which is not new. You can find really old English knives covered in nickel. In the turn of the 1800s, they were doing that. But this is a unibody design where they just fold it over. And this was all new technology back in the 1880s. And just a slip joint design. It's a fruit knife, nickel coated, unibody construction. And you can see that it has back springs. They're just hidden from being folded over like that. So pretty cool little knife. This knife is a really old knife. You can see it's got work back on it. This is a small knife, about 2 3/4. But what's unusual about this knife is if you look at this pattern, it's familiar, right? It's a swell center balloon end pattern, but most knives that you see with this pattern have either a tip bolster or a full bolster on the end, and this has none. And I've only been able to identify 2 other knives. Case made one similar to this, but not exactly like it. And then another company, I can't remember, made one that was mother of pearl. And those are the only 2 I've ever found that have this design right here. And it's pretty interesting. At least it is to me. It's different, right? So this is a E.C. Simmons knife. It is a Barlow, but you can see it has a saddle horn design to it. And also you have octangular work on the bolsters. Just very unusual. And this is 3 3/4 long. So your normal Barlow is about 3.5, 3 5/8. And so this is a not only big, but it's just a very unusual design for a Barlow. Pretty cool. Oh, stag scales. This is an NKC A knife. It is a why do I keep forgetting that? Kissing Crane, Robert Class knife. But this is a what they call a humpback Stockman, humpback Stockman. Kind of an unusual design. It's a gun stock design with a humpback in it, and you can see the unusual design of it. And it wasn't new. Okay, so Robert Class didn't produce this new. You've seen them in vintage knives that date back to the 20s, but it is an unusual knife design. This is another Robertson. They call this pattern an orange blossom. And so this is a, if you look down in there, you can see the springs in the middle. So this is a, okay, I had to think about that a minute. You're covering so much stuff, I just had brain freeze. So this is a lobster pattern, right? We're familiar with lobster patterns where the springs in the middle allows you to open blades up on either side and top and bottom. And so here you have the smoker's blade on here. But if you look at this side, this is a whittler. So that's what's unusual about orange blossom patterns. I got to get this out before I cut myself. Blades are sharp. So you can see 2 blades same size, one main blade working off of 2 springs. You see that? And then each little blade works off its own spring. So it's a true whittler, but it's also a lobster pattern. And just really unusual pattern. These are called, at least collectors call them orange blossom, is the nickname they gave them. And just really unusual mechanism on these knives. So this is an old Boker, a beautiful, cool knife. This is one of the few knives I didn't clean up because it just looks cool, old. And you have the octagonal uh, bolster here. It's a Barlow, and you have the octagonal bolster, and you have the Boker uh, tree right on the bolster, and that's, I think, pretty cool. Pretty cool knife. Yeah. Oh, so this is just your standard Marlin spike knife. These are sailor knives, but I've always thought that these Marlin spikes on a knife is just wicked and unusual. You know, it's just an unusual thing to put on a knife, a big old spike. And so I think these knives are unusual. The Marlin spike sailor knives. This knife right here, it's a Schrade, dates pre 1940, Schrade cutlery. But these little rings right here aren't just to hold the knife, so they help you turn the blade. If you could see that right there, I'm turning the blade with these little rings. And so it was just a design to help you open the knife. They're called ring openers. I wonder why. Anyhow, just a different way to make a knife, unusual. This knife here, it's one of the cast steel knives. It's an older knife from Sheffield, I believe. Let me see. Yeah, Wade and Butcher. So this is an old Sheffield knife, and it has 3 springs, and they're just really unusual 3-spring knives. Um, Manufacturers found out early on in the 1840s that anytime you go over 2 springs, the appetite of the public to hold the knife is greatly diminished. And that's why most knives you see only have 2 springs. But this is a 3-spring knife, and one of my only examples of one. This is a new knife, from the 80s. This is produced by Buck, and the engraving on here is just freaking phenomenal. Let me see if I can zoom in on that. Look at how crisp and detailed that engraving is. It's an aluminum scale. Look at the milling on the nameplate there. So not only is this knife in pristine condition, I just think that's really unusual. You don't see too much of this kind of work on knives. And it was something that Buck only did. I think he did it from 81 to 86. And this knife isn't, just look at the blade on that. So anyhow, just cool. This is not a slip joint, but anytime you put a knife blade into a shotgun shell, I think that's kind of unusual, right? Just an unusual way to do things. Of course, they've made all kinds of knives, shoe knives, boot knives, all kinds of different things. And it's a lock and blade. And so there's your lock right there. You just put it down. Just a little tiny, would appeal to the hunter. But I just thought it was unusual and in good shape, so I got it. So the pattern on this knife is called a slim jack. And think about your doctor's knives. Okay, doctor knives are slim jacks, but this is a melon knife, and these things are so slim and large. This is a 5-inch blade on this knife, and you think of kind of like a stiletto when you think of a knife this thin, but this is a lot thinner than a stiletto. Just unbelievably thin knives. And let me see if I can. If you look at this penknife, this thing is thinner than the penknife. Right there. See that? It's a lot thinner. And I just think they're unusual. It's not like they're rare or anything, but just very unusual knife design. This is a beautiful knife. This is rose gold, and um, there's a couple things unusual about this knife. It's a penknife made by Empire, so there's no pins on here. And so some people, have commented that the pearl has been replaced on there. But if you look down inside on the liners, there's no holes for the scales on the liner. So this is original. This knife was made this way. They glued it on there to have a nice, smooth, symmetrical look on there. And then if you look at the bolsters, they have these little dots on here, and you have the same dots on the shield. Just beautiful work on this knife, and very unusual. You don't see too many knives like it. Pretty cool. You guys seen this a few times, but this is a trapper, and these are genuine turquoise, bloody jasper, spiny yellow oyster. So they're genuine stones set in a knife, and that is unusual. You just don't see that very often. This knife right here is a Utica, but if you look at this design, it's weird. So you've got a swell center design here. You have a saddle horn going on the end here, and it's just unusual. I have seen knives similar to this, but you just don't see it very often. It's a very unusual looking design. Almost looks kind of like a design you would see come out of Sheffield, the English. They had like 10,000 different designs that they used, and I'm not exaggerating. Um, just unusual, really unusual knife. Here's another one. This is a French knife. It's a gravity knife. Dates to the late 1700s. But what's unusual about this knife is the pen work. So I counted these pins up, and there's on each side there's about 500 pins. So there's 1,000 of these little tiny pins that they made these designs in right there. Let's see, let me zoom in on that. There you go. And so you could see the copper pins in the middle, and then there's mother of pearl insets, and then there's also brass. So the little tiny pins are brass, and then bigger pins are brass, and then you have copper pins and inlaid mother of pearl. But overall, there's 1,000 little tiny pins. That doesn't include the big brass pins or the copper pins. There's 1,000 of these little tiny pins in this knife, and it took quite a while to count those up, by the way. And then you can see it has brass inserts in the blade. So just a really unusual knife. Oop, let me get back out. Sorry for the focus problem. Just a really unusual knife. And this is a 3-bladed knife. So pretty, let me see if I can get them out here. So you have one there. You have one way down here. That's what this little clip is for, so you can grab the blade. You got a saw blade. Look at that. Very unusual knife. And the last one is, I think this is an Iroquois knife. Yeah, Iroquois. And so when I got this knife, the ends were all like rust colored. I just thought it was facial rust, and I was going to clean it up. And it was my first Iroquois knife. But as I cleaned this knife up, I realized, oh, okay, it's brass, and that's kind of unusual to have brass bolsters on a pocket knife. I know you can find them. I've got a Copenhagen knife that has brass bolsters, but back in the day, this is kind of unusual. But if you really look at this, it's a integral bolster liner. I think I have about 3 of those. So It's integral bolsters came out like 1860, but you just don't see them in knives. And so this is really unusual to see that in a knife. Anyhow, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you found it informative, and I really enjoyed producing it. And if you'd like to see more content like this, I'd love to have you subscribe to the channel. Have a great day, and thanks again for watching.